What would you do if everything that defines you, everything you have trained for since childhood, suddenly became a crime? What if the symbol of your honor, the sword that is an extension of your soul, were declared illegal, and to carry it made you an outcast in the eyes of the world? You feel the cold steel of your katana against your palm. It is a familiar weight, an anchor in the storm, the silent companion that has been with you in life and in death. You smell the gunpowder of the new rifles. It is a sour, alien scent, the breath of a new god of war mingling with the aroma of damp earth from your home in Kagoshima. You hear the distant rumor of steam trains, a serpent of iron crossing the sacred fields where once only the whisper of wind through bamboo could be heard, and you feel a profound fracture within you, a crack that threatens to split your soul in two. On one side, loyalty to an emperor who now repudiates you. On the other, fidelity to a 1,000-year-old code that demands your defiance. This is not a literary invention, nor is it the plot of a film. This happened. For a samurai in the Japan of 1877, this was the one and brutal reality. What you are about to hear is not just the story of the last samurai battle. It is the chronicle of daily life in the twilight of an era. It is the intimate account of how it feels when your world turns its back on you, forcing you to choose between surrender and total annihilation. For over 250 years, under the Tokugawa shogunate, Japan had lived in a self-imposed dream, a long and orderly silence isolated from the rest of the world. But no dream lasts forever. The arrival of the Western black ships was a brutal awakening, a thunderclap that shattered the nation's foundations. The fear of colonization, of becoming another pawn on the chessboard of foreign powers, unleashed a revolution. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 was not a simple transition of power. It was a whirlwind. Under the young Emperor Meiji, Japan launched into a frantic, desperate race for modernization. The motto was Fukoku Kyohei, enrich the country, strengthen the army. To survive, Japan decided it must imitate its potential conquerors. It had to sacrifice its soul to save its body. And the first, most painful sacrifice was the very class that had defined it for centuries, the samurai. First, in 1871, the abolition of the feudal domains. With a stroke of a pen, your lord, your land, and your stipend vanished. You became a shizoku, a ghost with an empty title, a warrior with no war and no purpose. Then, in 1873, the creation of a conscript army. The sacred right to bear arms, the privilege that distinguished you, was handed over to peasants and merchants. Now, anyone could be a soldier. The humiliation was a slow poison. And then, in 1876, came the final blow, the most intimate and cruel of all, the Haitore Edict, the prohibition of wearing swords in public. Your katana, the visible soul of the warrior, the symbol of your lineage and your honor, became an illegal object. To carry it was an act of rebellion. Not to carry it was an act of spiritual suicide. In the midst of this collapse, one figure rose as the last bastion of the old era, Saigo Takamori. He had been a hero of the Meiji Restoration itself, a man who helped forge the new Japan. But now he watched in horror as that new nation devoured its own children. Disillusioned, he retreated to his home province, the proud and fierce Satsuma. There he founded military academies, not to prepare men for the new world, but to preserve the old one. Satsuma became a sanctuary, a place where Bushido still breathed, where the sound of steel still echoed, and where the seeds of the last and most tragic samurai rebellion began to sprout. In 1877, for a samurai, waking up each morning was an act of mourning. The world you knew was not simply changing, it was being systematically demolished, and you, its pillar, were now part of the rubble. The silence wakes you, a heavy, unnatural silence, where once the call of your lord, the daimyo, gave purpose to your day. You touch the rough wood of your yari, the training spear. You feel the silk of your kimono, now worn and thin. Familiar gestures in a world that has become unrecognizable. The air smells of fish and rice, the usual sustenance, but it now has a bitter aftertaste, the flavor of charity or of unworthy work, devoid of the dignity of service. You look out the window and see merchants, men your class always considered inferior, dressed in better silks than yours, with an arrogance bought with new money. And you remember, with a pang of shame, the day you had to pawn your grandfather's armor just to eat. The logic of your agony was as precise as a katana's cut. Bushido, the way of the warrior, was not just a combat code. It was a complete social system, a moral universe based on loyalty, duty, and unbreakable honor. By abolishing the domains and banning swords, the Meiji government did not just take away your privileges. It made your code of life, your very reason for being, obsolete. This is why Saigo's academies in Satsuma were much more than schools. They were sanctuaries. They were the last corner of Japan where the old order still breathed, creating an enclave of resistance against the future. The torment was psychological, a war within your own mind. You were trained for absolute loyalty to the emperor, a divine figure. But now, the orders from that very same emperor were designed to destroy your existence. Loyalty to your sovereign clashed directly with loyalty to your identity. It was an unbearable dissonance that left you only two paths: obey and vanish like mist at dawn, or disobey and become a traitor to the nation you swore to protect. While the new imperial army learned to march in unison and operate Gatling guns, the samurai of Satsuma clung to kenjutsu, the art of the sword. For you, it was not a question of tactics, but of philosophy. It was the belief that the spirit forged in steel, the kai of a warrior, could overcome the impersonality of gunpowder. Enter the dojo. Hear the sharp, dry crack of bamboo swords, the shinai, as they clash in the air. Smell the mix of sweat, effort, and the wooden floor, a sacred incense. Feel your muscles burn after hours of repeating the katas, movements perfected over centuries. And listen to the cry that erupts from your gut, the kiai, a roar that seeks not to intimidate the enemy, but to channel your own spirit into a single point of will. Around you, you see your brothers, some wearing the traditional armor of their ancestors, others the Western weapons they also possessed. But the sword was always at the center. It was the axis of your universe. This apparent denial of reality was not ignorance. You and your comrades, under Saigo's command, had used modern firearms to overthrow the shogunate. You knew their power, but this rebellion was fundamentally ideological. To cling to close-quarters combat, to the deadly dance of the sword, was a political and spiritual statement. It was a desperate attempt to prove to the world that discipline, courage, and individual skill, the spirit of Bushido, were still superior to the mechanized, anonymous warfare that the West offered as the future. But this conviction created a palpable tension, a conflict between tradition and pragmatism, debated in whispers after training. The younger men, perhaps, quietly questioned the effectiveness of a sword charge against machine gun nests. The older ones, their gazes hardened by old battles, insisted that an honorable death in the heat of close combat was infinitely preferable to a soulless victory won from a distance. The fight was not just against the government in Tokyo, but for the very soul of what it meant to be a warrior. The rebellion did not begin with a declaration of war, but with a march. In January 1877, when Saigo Takamori and his followers set out, they were not going to overthrow the emperor. They were marching to question him, to bring the will of the samurai to Tokyo. The siege of Kumamoto Castle was the point of no return. Imagine that march. Thousands of anachronistic warriors, an army of ghosts advancing through the thick winter snow of Kyushu. Listen to the crunch of thousands of straw sandals on the snow, a soft, ominous sound, punctuated by the subtle clinking of swords at their hips. Feel the biting cold that pierces your bones, a premonition of the brutality to come. Among the men, a strange mixture of hope and fatalism hangs in the air, the belief that their mere presence would inspire other samurai across Japan to join the cause. It was a tragic miscalculation. Saigo expected the imperial garrisons, many composed of former samurai, to join his cause out of class loyalty. He underestimated the power of the new nationalism and the terrifying efficiency of the government's modern logistics. Trains and telegraphs moved, troops and information at a speed that old tactics could not match. The siege of Kumamoto Castle, a modern fortress, turned into a bloody quagmire. While the samurai attempted a traditional siege, the imperial army, vastly superior in numbers and equipment, had time to encircle the besiegers. The Battle of Tabaruzaka, fought in a desperate attempt to stop reinforcements, became a slaughter that annihilated the elite of the Satsuma forces. For the common samurai, for you, the failure of the siege was a devastating psychological blow. The blind faith in your martial superiority was shattered against the walls of Kumamoto. You saw your brothers die, not in honorable duels where they looked each other in the eye, but torn apart by artillery from a distance, or cut down by the anonymous fire of rifles. Disillusionment began to spread like a plague. The cause, which had seemed so just and noble in the January snow, now felt like a long, slow march towards suicide. After the disaster at Kumamoto, the war transformed into a brutal hunt. The once proud samurai of Satsuma became fugitives in their own land, relentlessly pursued by the army they themselves had helped create. Now, the forest was your home. You smell the constant dampness, the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves that clings to your clothes and your soul. The sound that accompanies you is no longer that of swords, but the distant, constant echo of imperial cannons, drawing ever closer. You feel hunger, a dull ache, in your stomach that forces you to eat roots and whatever small animals you can hunt. You see your comrades, once impeccable in their bearing, now reduced to phantoms in rags, wounded, sick, and exhausted. The hilt of your sword, once polished with care, now feels rough in your hand. You use it more to cut a path through the undergrowth than to face an enemy. The reality was the crushing superiority of the modern state. The imperial army, under the command of General Yamagata Aritomo, did not seek to defeat you. It sought to annihilate you. They had the numbers, 300,000 men mobilized against the 30,000 Seigo had initially gathered. They had impeccable logistics, overwhelming firepower with modern artillery and warships, and near-instant communication. Every small victory you achieved in an ambush, every imperial soldier who fell to your blade, was irrelevant in the grand scheme of the war. The new warfare cared nothing for honor or individual skill. It was an industrial machine for grinding men. Amidst starvation, disease, and imminent defeat, your code was put to the test. Bushido was stripped of all its glory, reduced to its purest essence. With the cause lost, only one pillar remained standing: loyalty to Saigo, loyalty to your brothers. You saw men make the ultimate sacrifice. Small groups staying behind to delay the enemy's advance, a suicidal charge to buy the others a few more hours of life. And in that paradox, you found a terrible and beautiful truth. In total defeat, in the loss of everything, you found the purest expression of your code: death in the service of unwavering loyalty. On the hill of Shiroyama, overlooking your hometown of Kagoshima, the last 500 samurai prepared for the end. They would not fight for victory, for they knew it was impossible. They would fight for the only thing they had left, a death that would give meaning to their lives. It is the night before the final battle. You hear the rhythmic sound of shovels. It is the imperial soldiers digging trenches around you. They are not building defenses, they are digging your grave. You smell the night dew, mixed with the persistent stench of gunpowder. Below, the lights of Kagoshima flicker, a world you no longer belong to, a home you will never set foot in again. You put on a clean kimono. You feel the cool silk against your skin. It is a preparation for death, the final act of dignity. You see Saigo Takamori sharing a last cup of sake with his men, not as a general, but as a father saying goodbye to his sons. The Battle of Shiroyama on September 24, 1877, was not a battle. It was an execution. 500 samurai against 30,000 imperial soldiers. General Yamagata, out of a twisted respect for his former comrade Saigo, made sure there was no escape. He built a complex system of trenches, earthworks, and blockades to seal off the hill. The morning began with a massive artillery bombardment that lasted for hours, tearing the top off the hill and turning it into a hell of earth and shrapnel. When the final assault came with the first light of dawn, only about 40 samurai remained alive. In the midst of the chaos, Saigo fell, mortally wounded. To preserve his honor from capture, his lieutenant Beppu Shinsuke fulfilled the final duty of the Kaishakunin. He helped him die and hid his head. Inspired by their leader's end, the last survivors did the only thing left to do. They drew their swords, and with a final war cry that tore through the dawn, they charged down the hill. A suicidal charge, directly into the fire of Gatling guns. You saw the ancestral swords, forged with prayers and fire, shatter against an impersonal torrent of bullets. It was the violent death of an era, but for them, for you, It was the only way to die as a samurai. Imagine the scene for one last moment. The rising sun over Kagoshima Bay. The cannon smoke slowly dissipates to reveal the slope of Shiroyama. There, among the craters and churned earth, lie the last samurai, their broken swords in their hands. They did not fall backward, fleeing. They fell forward, in a final charge against the future. A future that had no place for them, but which they could not face without honor. The story of the last samurai is not a simple tale of resistance to change. It is a universal reflection on identity and dignity. It teaches us that sometimes the traditions that define us can become our chains, and that the line between preserving honor and clinging to a past that no longer exists is terrifyingly thin. The age of the samurai ended at Shiroyama, but their question echoes to this day. What do we do when the world we know ceases to exist? If you had been a samurai in 1877, faced with the ban on your customs and your sword, would you have accepted the new world to survive? Or would you have joined Saigo Takamori in his final charge for honor? Leave your choice in the comments. If this journey through time has moved you, subscribe to channel name. Here, we don't just tell history, we relive it.